idea for me too.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thanks for Sharing. I am your host, Jackie Pack, and I have on the episode today with me Rachel Allen,
Hi,
which
guys.
which listeners should know well by now. And I wanted to introduce the topic. So I think it was maybe back in January at some point when more Epstein files were dropped. We started to see some people in the field of spirituality, psychology that were in the Epstein files making, I thought, just a poor excuse for their behavior. I had texted Rachel and, well, let me back up. In several of the therapy groups that I am in, people were posting about how shocking this was to them and how they were taken aback by all of this. And so I texted Rachel and told her, I'm seeing a lot of therapists that are surprised by this. I was not surprised by this. I said, are you surprised? And Rachel texted back, and I'm going to quote her text: I am never surprised when a male
Spiritual leaders.
spiritual guru, leader, or pastor turns out to be a sexual predator. And I was like, right. Okay. Yep. Right. So last week, Rachel reached out to me and said, hey, let's record a podcast on how America is responding to the release of the Epstein files versus other countries, and talk about the psychology of that, the human behavior of that. So that's what we're going to focus on in today's episode.
Yeah. I don't know if this has been your experience, but like I have literally been talking about the Epstein files every week
Mm.
since stuff started hitting because I have clients that it's reenacting trauma responses for them. I have women and men who were sexually assaulted as young teenagers or as children, and it's impacting them,
Mm.
right? I specifically have one client that this has really impacted her, right? This has been really hard for her. And right after it hit, she came into my office and she said, I now know why justice is always portrayed as a woman. And I said, why? And she said, because men in power can fuck her whenever they want to. And that hit. And that has been the theme of her sessions for the last 2 months: how women don't see justice, how skewed the system is. And it's been really hard. As Jackie knows, I tend to stay out of the news. I can't consume a whole lot. And so this is one of those things where like I'm having to stay relevant enough to know what
Mhm.
my clients are bringing in. And it's been heartbreaking. It's just been
Yeah.
angering and gutting. I think I've had all of the emotions around it. But that's what brought me to, we need to talk about the response and like what this has looked like in our country, in other countries, and the impact that it's having on individuals, right? Because this is not just our government's leaders. This is not just a list of men and women, and it's not just a list of victims. It has huge ripple effects. And so I think it's important to talk about.
Last week, I posted on my personal Instagram this. I said, you can't expect therapists to help heal trauma and then not speak out against the systems that are causing collective trauma on a massive scale in real time. And I've said this to you before.
I
I
think I
said,
posted that on my work Facebook since I
oh,
have one
okay.
now.
I've said this to you before. I've said this to our staff. We had new, younger to the field therapists when the results of the 2024 election happened. And I've been in the field long enough that I feel like two topics that come up all the time currently never used to come up. And that is politics and religion. They just didn't come into the therapy session, which I didn't think much of that. I just thought, okay, they don't come into the therapy session. And then in 2015, like you are saying, I had several clients who, as children, experienced sexual abuse. And it was after the first primary debate, or not primary, it was the two candidates, Hillary
The first
Clinton and
presidential
Donald
debate.
Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah. And He was following her on the debate stage. Usually, both people stay behind their lectern or their podium. I remember watching that. By the end of that debate, I started out on my couch. And by the end, I was standing up and I was walking back and forth watching that. And my husband walked in the room and was like, it's going that well. And I was feeling activated in my body. I had several clients that week who came in and they were extremely activated and were saying, this man is a predator. And so we had to talk about that. And during his first administration, there were several events that happened that as a therapist, you're working and you're seeing clients back to back. And I'm not even able to look at the news, but I'm getting hourly updates from my clients who are having to process and talk about that up until January 6th. And you're just like, oh, okay, this is exhausting as a therapist. I would say during the Biden years, it died down a little more boring. I think politics are better when they're boring for the average person. And then it started. And I said to our team at the time, it will be exhausting the next 4 years. And whatever happens nationally, you'll be talking about it in your therapy sessions. And you may not have even seen the news, but you're going to have to be talking about it. I would say even during the 4 years of Biden being the president, it's not like politics and religion didn't come up. They still came up.
Right.
But
Volatile.
yes, yeah. It was less active trauma. I think it's something that therapists are having to talk about with their clients. Their clients want to talk to their therapist about it. That's just a change in the field. And I don't know how we can't talk about. I even have some clients who are just reporting a low-grade anxiety, but also depression, and they don't know why. And they'll say, I'm wondering if what's happening on a larger scale is impacting you. And they look at me and are like, oh, yeah. Yeah, that's just something we're having to live with, and it's affecting us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that that's the thing, right? I would love to say that I've had a respite, but I haven't. And I think that this is, and you and I talked about this when he was running the first time, when Trump was running the first time, we talked about how his mannerisms come across. We talked about our own response to this. And I don't know that you and I knew going into this, it was going to be reactive to our clients in the same way that it was to us, but like we were feeling it. And I remember us talking about how much drama is just in his life all the time. We even joked about like the dude lived off of reality TV.
Before that, he was always in the tabloids.
Yes, he just likes drama. And I think it wasn't really a joke, but it was one of those like where we make a side comment and we were like, and that's going to be his presidency. It will be a reality TV show. And unfortunately, it has been. And that 4 year respite of Biden and Biden, politics aside, right? I'm not talking about politics and I'm not talking about what was happening. I didn't have people coming in every week with reactive behaviors or feeling this sense of dread or this sense of anxiety. I've had clients who are full panic about the ICE stuff all the time. They just live in constant anxiety and fear. That was the beginning. Oh, no, that wasn't the beginning. That was the first wave before the Epstein files hit, right? It was the wave that I was working in before Epstein hit. And now we're just on another level. It hasn't come down. But it does feel like there's a constant barrage for everyone, right? Even his followers, though, were really, really convinced he was going to take care of this Epstein thing. A lot of the evangelical Christians, they wanted justice. And I mean, that's not happening in our country.
And we'll talk about this in the episode, but I think in the United States right now, we are so tribal that I think so many of them thought it's going to be the Democrats. And men in the Epstein files or the individuals in the Epstein files really had nothing to do with Republican or Democrat. It had to do with power and it had to do with having access to very powerful, wealthy people. But I think they were thinking Donald Trump, this Republican president, is going to bring it all down. not realizing that up until 2015, he's been a lifelong Democrat.
Yeah. Which, I mean, we're not claiming him anymore. That's fine. I mean,
Sure, right, right.
we do.
But it just didn't occur to them that, oh, if they think it's all Democrats in the files, these files are about when he was one. But I think what we're seeing in America's reaction to them is tribal.
Yeah.
I don't think the Epstein files are one party being worse than the other.
No, I mean, there's Democrats and Republicans in there. There's people who are not affiliated, right? Like, I
Yeah.
think that this is the other piece of that. There are people that are not in politics at all. There are people who aren't in America at all, which is, that's the point. This was about allegiances. This was about power. This was about money. If you've listened to this podcast long enough, you know that I'm a nerd. I'm currently playing a tabletop RPG, which is like Dungeons and Dragons. It's not Dungeons and Dragons. It's called Vampire the Masquerade. And it's a horror RPG about vampires. It's dark. There's a lot there. We're putting a lot of our angst about the current
Mm.
situation into the game. But there's this thing that happens where the older the vampire gets, the less humanity they have. And the whole game is set up where you're making decisions about what's best for you. You're not making decisions about what's good for humanity. And we have a couple of characters that are very gray. There was this moment a few months ago, and I had this recognition of this is what happens when people think that they are untouchable.
Mm.
It's just carnage, right? And the vampires don't really care about humans, but it kind of hit like this particular thing happened when the Epstein files were coming out. And I think that was on purpose from our DM because she needed a little restitution. It was one of those like, this is what happens when you feel immortal, when you
Hmm.
feel untouchable, when you feel like the rules don't apply to you, that you are the
Hmm.
exception. And
Right.
all of these people, that is what they have in common,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They all have that in common. They were untouchable,
They believed
untouchable.
that.
Yeah.
I did a podcast episode talking about the power dynamics, and this was before any Epstein files had been released. So
Yeah.
maybe November, I did a podcast episode talking about the men not knowing necessarily who they were and talked about that untouchable, that feeling that they were above everything and that there would be no consequences for them. And when the files started coming out and certain people, we had access to their emails, I think that just reinforced their idea of being untouchable because they literally put in writing these things. They put horrible things in writing. And you don't do that if you believe that you could at some point get caught and the whole thing could come crashing down. You don't leave a paper trail. I mean, it's not a paper trail, but you don't leave a digital trail.
Right. I mean, come on, guys. The internet is forever. If you
Yeah.
put it on the internet anywhere, there's going to be a digital trail. This is the thing for me. And I am going to mention names because I think that they're very specific and it's out there and it's public and whatever.
Mhm.
Deepak Chopra's, he wasn't remorseful at the victims.
No,
He
no.
wasn't remorseful at how disintegrated this was for him as an individual. He
Mhm.
literally said, I'm sorry I got caught.
He literally
That's
said that.
verbatim. I'm
Yes.
sorry I got caught. Like, what? And I mean, Deepak Chopra is probably the largest spiritual leader in this
There was
thing.
Noam Chomsky. As,
Yeah. But I think that between those two, and I'm not a fan of either one of them.
right,
I want to be
right.
clear. Rachel is very particular about the things that she takes in spiritually. But for both of them, they talk about this integrated self and like finding your spiritual journey and like walking with integrity. And I'm like, what is this? Is this
Right.
your integrity? Because this feels like this is a disintegrated person. This is
Hmm.
sociopathy, which I think is that space of like a cult leader mentality.
Hmm.
It takes me back to Amanda Montell's Cultish.
It's a book called
It's a book called
by
Cultish.
Amanda Montell.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is brilliant and delightful and really quirky and fun. If you like cult literature, she talks about the language of cults and how language is used to bring people in, to hold people
Hmm.
there, why people stay in it, right? She's talking about these leaders and what they say and what's inferred. And I think that we've seen that
Mhm.
with these, I want to say men, because they're mostly men. There are a few women in there. Like, it is astronomically gendered.
Right.
The Epstein file predators are
Mhm.
absolutely gendered.
Right.
And so I think that that's a good way to look at using language of cults. They have their own language with Epstein,
Right.
where they're talking about humans as if they are commodities.
They were to them. They
Bartering,
were.
yeah, bartering skin, right? Like,
Right.
it's slavery. It's slavery.
Yeah. So I want to talk about a pattern that is present in most types of abuse that therapists start to become aware of as they're working with clients and have to make that known for clients to start to see and understand different experiences that they have had. Most abusive dynamics follow a somewhat predictable structure. A person will gain authority, some power, maybe even some reverence. They're put up on this pedestal. The followers assume maybe there's a moral superiority, and then accountability structures start to weaken and boundaries start to blur. And that's where abuse becomes possible. One of the things I think we see over and over again as therapists in abuse cases is it's not just about sexuality or sex. It's power combined with this admiration and a lack of oversight or a lack of trust or a lack of accountability.
Mhm.
And this can apply to spiritual leaders. We know it applies to therapists. Therapists cross these boundaries. It applies to politicians and celebrities and wealthy elites.
Yeah. I think there's also a level when you are a victim of abuse, whether it's systemic abuse or relationship abuse, because it follows the same pattern, right? That's the
Mhm.
thing. It doesn't matter if it's on the small scale or on the large scale, it follows the same pattern or similar patterns, right? There may be some nuances, but essentially we can mark this out. Is that perpetual hope that if I do something right, or if I'm better, or if I play my cards just right, then the abuse will stop. They will get better, or they will see me, or I can get out, like whatever version of it is, right? But it's that hope that's not tethered to reality. And I don't really know how to describe that as anything else, because we see that so often. It's the hope of what they could be one day, or what this could be for me one day. I don't know if you've watched it, the America's Next Top Model documentary on Netflix. The whole reason I watched it is the president of Viacom at the
Mhm.
time is in the Epstein files. And there's this whole, like, for my generation that grew up in that era, there's a whole group of women that are trying to put together a civil suit. Men that created the culture in the 90s and early 2000s who are in the Epstein trials, because it changed the entire viewpoint of our bodies. And this
Yeah.
is like Britney Spears producer Lex, who
No,
was over
the West.
Westner, who was over Victoria's Secret,
Mhm.
the guy who was over Abercrombie and Fitch at the time,
Mhm.
the com,
There
which
was
would
a
have been,
French guy who also died by suicide under
oh,
mysterious
what was
circumstances
his
in
name?
prison.
Matt,
And he was very big in modeling.
modeling, and like he was like Louis Vuitton, Gucci, all of those big names used him to get their models. I know his name. I just can't think of it
Yeah.
to save my life. But like all of them were in the Epstein files, and prolifically. These are the men that created the culture. They held the music industry, they held MTV, they held these pop culture shows that literally developed us as females. And we've all
Oh,
known this, right? We can all look back and say, like, for me, I can look back and be like, that was toxic. That was toxic. That was toxic. And America's Next Top Model was one of those.
Jean-Luc
And
Brunel
I,
was the one I was talking about. Jean-Luc Brunel.
okay. So I was watching it because I knew that the president of Viacom, who owns UPN, that started Next Top Model, was in that. And one of the things that I'm trying to remember where I was going with this, because I was trying to explain how I got there.
We were talking about following specific abuse patterns or
Oh,
unaccountability.
yeah. So that was one of the things that shows up, right? These girls are coming from nothing. They work
Mhm.
at Walgreens. They're trying to get out of minimum wage jobs. And America's Next Top Model takes them and is like, we're going to make you a star. And then most of them didn't get modeling
Mhm.
contracts or anything like that. And the ones that did were blacklisted because they were on the show, and designers didn't want their face of like, you are the next top model, to overshadow their clothes and their production and what they were actually
Okay.
modeling. So there was a lot of using these girls for that show. And you can see, like, because early on, I think Tyra Banks really had a good idea and was trying, and she did help bring diversity to the industry. But also, you can see her coming up against the producers who were like, no, 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 they need to be skinnier, they need to be wider, they need to be right. Like, even the frustration of like what Tyra created versus what the producers actually wanted it to be was something very different. And you can see the hope, right? These girls go through abusive things. They're passing
Mhm.
out because they're not eating enough. They're dehydrated and having to go to the hospital because they're trying to fit into certain clothes. They're being put in awful and dangerous situations, like hanging from buildings. And they're doing all of that for the hope that it's going to get better, that this is going to be
Mhm.
their breakthrough. And you can see that, you can hear that with some of the victims that Epstein chose. He chose impoverished people, girls who had no or little family,
Father. They didn't have
specifically
a father
fathers,
who
right?
was active in their life.
But he chose them where they don't have support. He chose girls who did not have support, and he groomed them. And then he
Mhm.
threatened their friends and family. And you can see the hope and the line, because despite the abuse, there's all this opulence. So I can experience horrible things, but if I can, like, I can be resilient enough, I will break through, and I can be this.
Some of the journalists who have been covering this story for years before it really got to the place of being recognized by Congress have said, yes, these girls were abused and sometimes very violently, but they also loved Jeffrey Epstein. He was, in a very weird way, their father figure. He was protective of them. And then he wasn't. He betrayed them as well. But they had fondness. And as we often see, he used a woman to be the front person and to go out and talk to the girls, recruit the girls. And that is part of that dynamic, that they feel like, okay, well, there's this woman who will watch out for me. And she was not doing that. She
Right.
participated in abuse, which of course she did. And she herself had a horrible relationship with her father. I don't know that she's really reconciled that, but her father was a horrible person as well. And she was his favorite child.
Yeah. I mean, using women as a shield
As a cover, it's a cover,
for patriarchal bad behavior, right? Patriarchal abuse. Because we're watching that in our administration right now.
right?
The two women, one is under investigation, one of them got fired. And it's just because they made him look bad, right? And it's the two women, it's not the men.
The women will
They're like,
always be the first to go.
right, right. They're always the sacrificial lambs, even if they are complicit, right? And I think that that's the hard part.
They have to be complicit. They have
Mhm.
to be complicit. And then at some point, they're going to be blamed and cut
Right.
loose and scapegoated.
Which,
Not that they don't do horribly complicit things.
yeah, and I can't remember which book it is. You and I read it pretty close to the same time many, many years ago, but it was talking about power dynamics and how in slave America, the violence that was most perpetuated against slaves were the slaves that were higher up in ranking. And it was this system of, I can't remember what the name of the book was.
It had
I
the
know,
word like kitchen or
yeah,
house slaves or house versus field slaves, something. Yeah.
yeah, it was talking about like, the striation, how the hierarchy within a slave system or within a system, basically within a patriarchal structure
System of
that was slaves.
oppression.
Yeah, system of oppression. That's the word I was trying to find. The people who have power create a hierarchy for those that they are oppressing. And so there's always infighting, and then you don't trust each other. That's how you keep 1,000 slaves from taking over one slave owner. And it's that there's a hierarchy, and those who have less power, they know they don't have power, and all of their power actually comes from this person, will be more abusive to the people below them to prove that they should have that power. And so this is what we have been seeing in our administration, and specifically from the women who are complicit, also abusive in these really bad ways. This is also what was happening with Epstein. This is what was happening. There's his group, the people that he was selling his merchandise to, which is just disgusting. But then within the girls who were being oppressed, within the girls who were experiencing this, there was hierarchy. So there was this idea of, if I'm good enough, if I do this, if I do that, I can move up and I can experience less. Which is
Some of them, I think it was Julie K. Brown said that some of the victims who were trafficked to other men who were very violent and abusive to them, they believed that Jeffrey did not know about that and that he would do something different if he knew. And that's heartbreaking because, of course, he knew. He didn't care.
So, all of that to say, we're looking at something that is, I mean, conspiracy theorists have thought about this for a while, and producers have made movies about this, which I've even wondered how many of them knew and used this as a template. And sex trafficking has been around since women have been under patriarchal structures, right? That's in Creation of the Patriarchy, where Gerda Lerner shows the first slaves were women. And then we move forward from that. So sexual slavery has always been a thing. And it's not new. This is not new.
Right.
I think it is appalling that we let it go on this long in a culture that defines itself by freedom and liberty and justice for all, right? For every human body. And that's not actually what happened. That's not what is. And I think the sad thing is that there are a lot of people who were not Americans in these files.
Right. Because again, I mean, when power begets power, it's just going to start to recruit power anywhere.
And these are people that had private jets, and these are people that had the ability and often worked intercontinentally.
Yeah, the boundaries of a country, that's not necessarily how they lived their life. They could be on a yacht and be in a different country's waters, or they could get on a jet and they're in a different country. That level of living is not what most people understand or even comprehend.
I don't remember exactly when this was with Prince Andrew. It came out years ago. It was around the time that Harry and Meghan were getting married. So it's been a minute. His name was in the file. And there were the accusations, the first accusations that came out. And his first response to that was, I was on a yacht in international waters, wasn't breaking any laws.
Because the laws do not apply in international waters. There was a settlement paid.
Yes, there was a settlement paid. And this was when Queen Elizabeth was still alive. And there was question on whether or not he was going to lose his title. And he did beg her. He
he was her favorite child.
Yeah, I know. Which, my favorite is Anne. I think that Anne is delightful. She knows she's not in line for anything. Right. And she's like, I'm just going to say it like it is, in a very British way. But what kept his title at that time was he pled for his daughters. Like, if you take my titles, they will lose theirs too.
Not that he thought about his daughters when he was doing what he was doing.
Right. And I think that is the thing that was one of those, like, Andrew, again, women as shields.
And women as objects. Young girls, not women, young girls as objects. He didn't think of them as somebody's daughter. He didn't think of them as sisters.
We have seen the British government take that very seriously.
Yes. Yeah.
There is just a small part of me that's like, this is Charles saying F you, because he has never liked Andrew as a brother, and now he has power. But also, this is Parliament. Parliament is taking this seriously. Parliament is the one that was like, no, you can't have a title. There have been other countries. I know Germany has removed people from power.
France has.
and is saying we're taking this seriously. Interpol is investigating, like they are
Right.
actually having active
Yeah.
investigations.
Well, and France put together a team of well-seasoned prosecutors to look into
Yes,
everything.
which I think there's this beautiful thing that's happening in France. And honestly, I don't want to live in France, but I think that there's a movement happening in France and we're watching it happen. We had the Me Too movement here, we had the 4B movement in Korea. We've had these little pockets of things, but you and I talked about, oh my gosh, her name was just there.
Giz-
Giselle Pellicot with the rape case in which she was
hmm
like, I'm not going to be anonymous. I'm going to
hmm
make them look at my faces. And like she held nothing back. And one of the things that she said is our narrative around rape has to change. I will not hold shame for this. I did nothing wrong. And you and I were talking about that as it was happening. But also since then, France has been taking some stuff seriously. And they've been looking at, like, yes, this needs to change. And so the things that they're doing with Epstein's files and the French um, citizens that were a part of that, like, they're honoring their word on this, seeking justice for this. And I hope that something comes out of that. I have a lot of hope for that. Right? Like, I
Yeah.
don't know how this is going to end, but we are seeing movement. And these countries that have taken this seriously, and countries that have human rights laws and ERAs built into their constitution, they are moving. Our country is not.
Right. We are stalling
We are stalling.
and we are being flooded with so much that it can be hard to keep it front of mind.
Yeah. I watched something the other day. It was actually a Trump supporter who was ripping his stickers off of the back of his
hmm
car. And his wife came out and was like, what are you doing? He was like, I will not defend a man who will start a war to cover up being a pedophile. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Like,
several of his supporters that between the attack on Iran and the Epstein files, they're starting to break the spell that he had over them.
I've been watching some different things. There's this one guy who has been an avid Trump supporter
The
since first
beginning.
time. And like he was saying, I really believed what he was saying around taking care of the women. And he had women on his staff. He's always treated his daughters well. And I'm like, no, he hasn't. Okay,
Never. Yeah.
but never. But okay, this is your fantasy, whatever. But he was like, but we go from him being in the Epstein files and him refusing, just saying, I will never be held accountable for this.
Well, he said that
And
he was
fine,
absolved of any wrongdoing, which
absolved of
is
any wrongdoing,
which is not what has happened.
which is not what has happened. So he went like all of that. And then in the Iran thing, America is being accused of bombing an
A
all
girls'
girl
school.
elementary school where 100 girls under the age of fifth grade have died. And the UN is saying this target makes no sense. It's not close enough that missiles should have hit it. There is no information about why this school would have been on a target list. And
I
it's not
don't.
being included in the total yet. It's just one of those things where you and I have been saying for years there is an undercurrent of misogyny in our country that we just don't want to address.
Let me tell you, this was over the weekend. Matt Schlapp, do you know who he is? He's a political activist and lobbyist, and he's chairman of the American Conservative Union. He made a statement about this girls' school being
It sounds
bombed.
familiar. I think we probably talked about it before.
He made a statement about the school being bombed. Also, you will not be surprised to learn that he has many accusations about his inappropriate behavior toward young boys, but he said it is better that these girls die than have to live a life in a burqa.
What?
Yeah.
No, no, one, you don't get to decide that. And
Right.
two, like, no,
Yeah.
no,
I'm listening to the Speaker of the House say what's happening in Iran is because of this extremist religion. And I'm like, America's seeming like we have an extreme religion Christian problem right
right.
now.
We do.
Maybe not the moderate
Christian national,
Christians,
yeah.
but Christian
Christian nationalism
nationalism,
is a
which our
problem.
speaker belongs to.
Mhm.
I'm like, what are you talking about that we have to go in and deconstruct this extreme religious country when that is literally what you want for our country?
Right. There's not a lot of difference on paper. In
No.
fact, like the things that they're wanting, if you put them on paper, I actually saw this. Farida D, feminist poet, and I follow her on social media and all of her stuff. And I can't remember if I don't know if she wrote this or if she just posted it, but it was a list of things. It was like rules for women and the rules for women that Muslim countries have and rules for women that like America is trying to implement. They were the exact same. She's like, pick which one is America, and
Mhm.
you couldn't pick it. One was Iraq and one was America, and she's like, pick it. Like
Mhm.
which one?
Right.
And I think that's one of those, or maybe it was Afghanistan. I can't remember. It was one of the ones that we fought when Bush was in office. So it wasn't Iraq or Afghanistan, and I can't
Mhm.
remember which one. But yeah, it wasn't different. The actual rules, not different. And
Right.
so like I think that's one of those things that like, okay, guys, are we paying attention? Are we
Mhm.
listening? I do think that Christian nationalism is a problem. I don't think that faith is a problem or spirituality is a problem or believing in God is a problem
Mm.
or salvation is a
Right.
problem. I do
Or
think
even
that
some organized Christian denominations that are not
right.
extreme.
I think it was last summer. It was when I was in that I can't deal with Trump right now. So I'm going to read this book. It was called The Founding Myth. And it was about Christian nationalism and how it goes directly against what our founding fathers were
Mm.
stating in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And it was brilliant. It's a brilliantly written book. And nothing that he's saying is inaccurate. He's not making broad strokes. He is using history that we have on how the Constitution was written and what is in the Constitution to show
Mhm.
we are not a Christian nation and there is a reason we are not a Christian nation. But also, if we were a Christian nation, how are we allowing 25 members of a cabinet to get away with sex slavery and pedophilia?
Right. Yeah. I think what makes America currently the way that it is, the way that our country is, one of the things that kind of set us up for the response that we are seeing or not seeing, or that makes the American response unique, is the belief in American exceptionalism. This
Yes.
idea that the United States is fundamentally different or morally superior. And I think this shows up in a lot of subtle ways, this idea that America is the land of freedom. And often when you're talking to people who haven't traveled abroad, they honestly believe we are the only country who believes in democracy or freedom. And
Right.
that's not true. We like to think of America as the defender of justice, which historically has been mixed because we inflict a lot of injustice and then we do want to defend justice, and that America protects the vulnerable. So I think when something like these Epstein files emerge and reveal a global trafficking operation that's connected to elites, it collides with the moral identity that many Americans hold.
Yeah.
And part of what makes scandals like this destabilizing in America and for American culture is they challenge the story we like to tell ourselves about who we are as Americans and as a nation. And
Right.
so people are more likely to, I mean, we know this, we see this in therapy when some behavior collides with an individual's image of who they want to be or who they believe they are, they will have denial, they'll go into deflection. In this example, we see minimization, justification, rationalization, because accepting reality would mean we have to reckon with what our system promises, what it isn't, what we've allowed to happen, and the lack of moral authority that has always persisted in this country.
Yeah, I think that there's a level as you're talking about it, I'm thinking about things that we teach our clients in recovery and even getting out of the drama triangle, right? The
Mm-hmm.
first step is accountability. The first step to healing anything is accountability. Like that's the first 4, 5 steps of the 12 steps. There's a lot of accountability in the 12 steps, but the first five are
Are
hyper
looking
focused.
at you, right?
Right.
Let's look at
The
you.
first five are hyper focused on your accountability in your process, your accountability in your rock bottom. That is what it's looking at. When we're talking with couples and looking at the Gottman training, one of the things that the aftermath of a fight talks about is soft startups and accountability. The Gottman triangle, I mean, the Cartman triangle talks about how you get out of the drama triangle. The first step is accountability, which as therapists, we're constantly teaching people. And also as therapists, we recognize it's real hard for people to take accountability.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really hard for us to sit in, I knowingly or unwillingly hurt someone I care about. I was willing to turn a blind eye to something that I couldn't wrap my head around. And that lack of accountability does create disintegration in our core self. It
Right.
really does.
Mm-hmm.
Which, when it's fractured like that, then we get the justification, then we get the minimization,
Mm-hmm.
then we get the rationalization. And our brain will do whatever it has to keep us intact, to keep
Mm-hmm.
us moving forward. And for some of us, facing the damage that our actions have chosen is really hard. That's what keeps addicts in cycle a lot, right? It's the
Mm-hmm.
despair that then pushes us into preoccupation in that
Mm-hmm.
cycle.
Or they'll tip over into shame
Mhm.
instead of landing in accountability.
And
I think another thing, when they start to learn that accountability doesn't mean that they are acknowledging that they're a bad person, that they
yes,
have no value or they have no worth, we'll see accountability start to show up and they start to realize, oh, this is helpful.
Mhm.
This actually can decrease a lot of conflict. This actually can create more closeness and emotional intimacy.
Yeah. But it's very counterintuitive, right? Accountability can create more space for us to have trust, but it is very counterintuitive to self-preservation. And I
Right.
also think this is a place where human beings are messy and we're going to make mistakes. And I think the difference, right, we're going to vote for people that we don't agree with, that are
Mm-hmm.
going to do things in our name or with our vote that we don't agree with as American citizens. And we're going to believe in something that isn't 100% integrated with who we are. We're going to have bad days and yell at our partner because we're having a bad day and we're not self-regulating. There's so many of those things that we are going to do that hurt other people.
Mm-hmm.
It's the act of coming back.
We'll do that even when we do not intend to. I think that's one of the things clients struggle with is they'll say, I wasn't intending to cause harm. And it's like,
Right,
yeah, you can cause harm when that is not your intent.
right,
And that's a different diagnosis when that is your intent.
right,
But there's still accountability when, even without intention, there was harm caused.
right. And you and I talk about the weight of intent versus impact, right? If you intentionally hurt somebody and then you hurt them, that has a lot of weight. You intentionally are holding a grudge and you're not letting that impact your relationship, that also holds weight. If you're unintentionally doing something and you still hurt them, that holds a different level of. And so we're constantly trying to balance this intent versus impact, how it
Mm-hmm.
shows up in the relationship, and we have to be accountable for both.
We also talk
Right?
with clients about if somebody is talking to you about harm you caused, maybe it's not massive harm. Sometimes I use the phrase that I borrow from 12 steps. You stepped on people's toes. You stepped on your partner's toes. But if you stepped on your partner's toes, you don't get to tell your partner what their impact was. You don't get to determine what the impact was or say, oh, you're overreacting. I mean, we hear them say that. And then we're like, no, they get to respond and you need to listen. Usually we want to do that in a couple session with both of their individual therapists so that we can help hold the integrity of that session and allow one to hear the other without feeling like they're a bad person or without it moving into unfair fighting tactics, name calling, stuff like that.
I think it's in AA that talks about you don't get to be angry when you step on someone's toes and they push you off. People are allowed to set boundaries, people are allowed to take space, but I also think that there's this beautiful thing in repairing. And I think that this doesn't apply to sociopaths because they don't actually have remorse, right? Like some of these people that we are talking about that are in the sex ring, they don't have remorse. I
Mhm.
don't know what that is. I don't know if they're like, I'm not diagnosing anyone, but like,
Mhm.
force is something we feel when we recognize that another human being has been hurt by our hand. Dehumanization can create a lot of problems with that. And Brene Brown
Right.
talks about that in a lot of her work. Like, once we start dehumanizing people, it is really easy for us to create atrocities in the
Mhm.
name of like they're
Right.
not human or they're a different kind of human than us.
They're less
Um,
than.
which we're seeing right now with ICE and immigration. We're seeing that we've seen
Mhm.
that with women and the LGBTQ
Or
community
trans,
particularly.
yeah.
Yeah, but yes, the trans children, trans people. And I think that this is one of those things where when we can dehumanize someone, we can convince ourselves that they are not human. And the way that human beings treat things that are not human, right now, the Salt Lake is drying up. We have global warm climate change that's happening.
Air
We've
pollution.
right, like how many species have we just killed off as trophies because they looked cool? We consume and we break. We are predators by nature. We are apex
Mhm.
predators. And so if we dehumanize you, then you are no longer a human and therefore you are prey.
I was going to say, I think a lot of times one of the things we struggle with in America culture is we want to identify a villain. So Jeffrey Epstein.
Mhm,
And sure, he was a villain. He did atrocious things, but that prevents us from looking at things systemically.
mhm,
And when you see examples, we are losing some critical thinking skills. But when you look at a community, like the trans community has been under attack for the last decade, and
right.
they are largely a group of people who have very little power. They're a small community with very little power being attacked by an incredibly powerful system. That's not accidental. That
Right.
is very intentional. And you see this in the Epstein files. You see this with ICE. You see this with the trans community. One of the things we have got to start waking up to instead of just falling into and believing we have to be scared and that trans surgeries are happening at elementary schools, which I'm sorry, I got phone calls if they were going to give my kid Tylenol. I had to
Mhm.
give verbal authorization. So there is no surgery happening in a school day. I don't know if you've been to your local elementary school, if your kids are there, but they're not doing surgeries.
Okay.
Um,
Yes. Also, like, guys, they barely have resources to get toilet
right.
paper when
Teachers are
kids
already
done.
overworked. They're not helping care for a child post surgery.
That's not happening. Like,
Right.
they can't even get enough books in the library to keep up
Hmm.
with the kids reading.
But
Like,
again, when you see that, and then you fall into that kind of thinking, oh, this is the threat. This community, which puts it in a single community, is the
mhm,
threat. And what you're missing is this is a group that has very little power
mhm,
being targeted by people with an incredible amount of power. That's
right.
the dynamic we have got to wake up to and see and stop falling into believing that the ones with the least amount of power are the biggest threat to us.
Right. And to be clear, this is not a new dynamic.
No.
I read something the other day. It's by a history professor. I'm not really sure where, but she was talking about if people actually paid attention to history, they wouldn't be saying make America great again. They wouldn't be actually
Mhm.
saying let's go back to the good old days. And she was putting out there this is where we disenfranchise people. And she was
Mhm.
talking about like the Roman Empire becoming a Christian nation and using the military army to literally snuff out pagans, but it was really women in power because they
Mhm.
believed that only men could have power. So they were killing the midwives, women who were birthing babies. And
Doing so more successfully than their
right,
male doctors who did not have a
right,
lot of great medical training.
right. And just like how we did that with we did when we discovered people
Mhm.
with brown skin or black skin. We did that with the first people of
In a
America
lot of
and
countries, yeah.
Native Americans. And yeah, right. India, the Pacific Islanders, anything that Europe could do to make itself elitist, it did. And we see that with women, right? How often women were left out of education, how they were left out of opportunity, how they weren't allowed to hold land or have money. And I think that that's one of those things where this is being perpetuated and we can see it hindsight, right? We can look back and be like, "Ooh, slavery was bad," or like, "Ooh, not letting women have property was bad." But we don't see that that's what is currently happening right
Hmm.
now. And
Yeah.
that's frustrating, right? The similarities between how Jews were put into concentration camps in World War II in Germany and Poland and Italy is very, very similar to what is happening with ICE
Or
right now. Where in Europe, in Germany and Poland and those places, Jews were just disappearing. And the
right,
worst
right.
of the violence and the dehumanization had happened. All of the racist things that were happening did happen.
Which
But
was
those like
founded on American slavery. They
yeah,
studied Jim Crow laws, they studied
yes,
American slavery and how that
yeah,
happened in Nazi Germany.
yeah. And I think that's full circle, right? Because all of these things, and you and I talk about this a lot, right? These are not isolated events. These are not
No.
isolated systems. This is not an isolated problem. This is a systemic issue that is created when certain people have a lot of power and and it's hierarchical. It's allowed to
Hmm.
be abused. And that is what ideally America was set up to protect against,
Right.
right? Like we
Yeah.
were set up as a democratic republic to protect against that.
And we've never fully practiced the ideals and aspirations that the founding
It
fathers
was
put
an
into
ideal,
place. They did not practice it themselves, but it was
right?
this idea of giving power to the people would keep the most powerful in check.
Right.
And that's still true. If people start to recognize the power that we have, we saw this in Minneapolis. Not that it's finished in Minnesota, they've just moved to more rural parts of Minnesota. ICE has. So it's not like that situation is over and
Right.
ICE is not being dismantled. But I think we have to look at the fact that our founding fathers did put in place a system that gave power to the people. It didn't
Mhm.
include all people, even though that's what they wrote into our founding documents. But that is still in place for us
Right.
today that when people start to recognize, just an average person starts to recognize, hey, we actually have power and
Mhm.
we should use that, not on behalf of the powerful, but on
Mhm.
behalf of the people
The
less powerful
disenfranchised.
than us, neighbors, community members. That's who we need to use our power on behalf of. And I
Yeah.
think that's where, when we look at the Epstein case, it's not just a story about one predator.
Right.
And what we're missing, although I think there's still efforts by congressmen who are trying to, who I think they still see this through line and are still staying focused on that this case is a mirror that reflects how societies deal with power, with wealth, and with uncomfortable truths.
Uh-huh.
And the American response tells us a lot about our culture and the values and what we protect, who we protect, what we
Yeah.
question, and what we avoid.
I will say, and this is something that I have been impressed by, and I don't know, I don't know how I'm just watching, right? This is one of those like I'm just observing, but like the pushback that I have watched from people who believed, who have backed these people, who have backed Epstein predators.
Things, or just for power.
I was a little kid when the Monica Lewinsky Bill Clinton thing happened. And I remember that all playing out. And the things that were said about Bill Clinton for having a consensual affair with an intern was insane. The
Mm-hmm.
things that were said about Monica Lewinsky, the things that were said
Mm-hmm.
about Hillary. And again, not talking about politics, not talking about if they're good humans or bad humans, just saying the things that other people said about this whole
Mm-hmm.
circus
Yeah.
was just the opposite to defend Trump's behavior from these same people. And so to watch people be like, whoa, wait a minute, this is a line we cannot cross. No, this is not okay. And I think it is happening more and more. And I think they think that Trump is always creating another chaos to try to take eyes off of the other chaos that he's created. This is why we have so many balls spinning with ICE and Iran and Epstein, because he doesn't clean up his messes. He just makes more messes so that you
Right.
don't see the mess underneath it. But the thing that I am watching is that American people are actually getting mad. And the other thing that I am seeing, and I think is beautiful, I've watched other countries responding to American people with grace,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Like Canada saying, keep protesting, keep speaking out, keep talking about this, because we are recognizing that this is not you, this is your leadership. And we have always come to the aid of people when there's a dictator, and like Sweden and Germany, hey, we see you. We see that you are not agreeing with this. Keep talking, keep using your voice. It does matter. And I think that that is beautiful. I also think that there's a level in which, yes, we as Americans need to reconcile our history. And the reality is, yeah, our founding fathers set up an ideal.
Right.
But even like Thomas Jefferson, when he wrote the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and was actually putting that stuff down, said, we are going to have to address women and we're going to have to address slaves, but we cannot do it now because we will lose the backing of our allies. And they had to fight a war. They knew that. He knew that. And he still kept slaves until he died.
And had children with them. He didn't have to do that.
Right. And so, like, people are messy. Ideals are not. Ideals are the thing we strive for as humans, but we as humans are messy. But the beauty of that is we can learn, and we do, right? We have the ability to be better than we have been in history. And that's my hope from this, is that enough people are angry and see it and believe that we can do better. But it's also been traumatic and overwhelming, and we're dealing with our own wounds in the process. I think that that's the duality of being Americans. I think that that's the duality of being white people in America with power, is recognizing we have been a part of the problem and we can be part of the solution. We were the problem. Let's be clear. White people in America were 98% of the problem for a long time, but we can also be part of the solution. And we have, yeah, for sure. Right. It took white people in Congress to stop Jim Crow laws. It took white people in Congress to stop slavery. It took war, but it also took that, right? It took white men in power to give women the power to vote, to give women the power to own land.
Behind those men were their mothers, their wives, their daughters.
And so I think that when we start to see the growth of humanity, we can get through this. We can get through this. I also just think that it has been devastating. And I think recognizing the devastation is important, and recognizing the systems that cause the devastation. This is not a one-off thing. This is not just one psychopath creating. Someone had to buy it. Someone had to give Epstein money. Someone had to fund it. And there were a lot of people funding it.
Yes.
And because here's the thing, unless you feed the darkness, it doesn't grow. And so that's the thing that I think that we need to recognize. And I think that a lot of people are recognizing that. I think that we as people have the ability to reconcile the stuff within ourselves, to be accountable for the pieces that we're accountable for, the messiness that we're accountable for. And I do think we have, as of right now, we have the ability to hold these people accountable with our vote, to hold people accountable with our voice, to hold people accountable with our money, right? You and I had talked about the unsubscribe for
resist and unsubscribe.
Yeah, the resist and unsubscribe thing that we did, which is like, we can stop funding them. We can stop paying these people. And yeah, it might be inconvenient, but also like ethics and morality. Isn't that what we're saying? Ethics and morality.
And love of country.
Yeah, because this is not a country that allows this to go unchecked. Is not a country that I can, like, I love the country, but I'm super pissed. I love America. I love America's ideals. I love what we have fought for and created in so many ways. And this is where we can improve.
Yeah. Well, Rachel, thank you for suggesting this podcast topic and joining me today to talk about it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. At the end of this episode, I want to remind you that your story matters. Remember, there's something meaningful in every chapter. Don't wait to share your story. until it's finished. Until next time, Jackie.